concern
involving
to
Chinese
fight for
American
one foundation.
and he's talking with us today about some cases that he really wants to share with this crowd. I think that will be benefiting for you for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I'm standing up because I'm a trial lawyer and I'm judge jury and all that. I'm standing up. Bridget. And thank you, I think, for inviting us, my colleague, James Brown. Both of us are lawyers. I think I can speak with you today. First of all, I would ask, is there anybody from the FBI? I like to joke with people that I've been picked up on 3 Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA wiretaps. And those are the 3 that I know. But I am a lawyer and he was talking about some history, and I'm going to do a little bit of that here short time that we have. I've been a lawyer for almost 50 years now. Now, I hope I look like it, but I started in the 70s, and that's when we sort of how it began. A lot of people don't know this, but the term diversity, everybody knows the term diversity. That started in the U.S. Supreme Court case in 1977, Hockey versus Board of Regents of the state of California. Justice Powell, in a concurrent dissent, said the affirmative action program of the UCA's medical school to let Asians, African Americans, and others perhaps give them some preference was okay because it was laudable and notable obtained diversity. And that's how it did American popular lexicon. Okay, in the 70s, there weren't a whole lot of Asian lawyers. Okay, but in that group of people that started with Asian Law Students Associations, like I did in the 70s at my alma mater, USC, which I never will get into today. We were sort of formed a bond with law students, and some of those became lawyers. And not my friend Gene, but in the Korematsu case, some of those Asian law students fought to overturn Fred Korematsu's conviction and bought something called a writ of error or notice petition, seeking to set aside his conviction, which they did do in 1983. They set aside Fred's conviction. And in the case that Gene mentioned, Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, while I didn't expressly say Korematsu was a decision, he did criticize it, said it had been overruled, and he also said, to his credit, Justice Roberts, that it is no place for that kind of racial discrimination under our Constitution. And that was in Trump versus Hawaii case that Chief Justice Roberts wrote his opinion. So there is hope. Okay. And having some lawyers out there in our community helps. I'm always out there preaching. Again, I to think about law. When I started in law school, most Asian lawyers were doing corporate stuff for immigration. But again, history repeats itself. And the discrimination that began in the 19th century, the immigration law of the United States was often shaped by Chinese American immigrants trying to fight the discriminatory laws and prevented or proved impediments and obstacles to our immigrating to this country. Okay, now my parents are first generation born in China. I was born here. But the first thing that we all have to deal with historically is what? Loyalty. 19th century, 20th century, 21st century. We all look different, so we got loyalty issues. African Americans may have color issues, just like we look different, right? For those who think that America is home of the free, land of the brave, it is to some extent. Many of us have come here and done well. But what major ethnic immigrant group hasn't been shit on when they came here, the Italians, the Irish, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mexican Americans, the Spanish, African Americans. Ethnic minorities and immigrant people get shit on when they come to this country, okay? That's just our history too. They don't teach it in history books. If they do, then they're called woke. Okay, so we have to be mindful of history because history repeats itself. Okay, loyalty of Japanese Americans, loyalty of Chinese Americans in the 50s during the Red Scare, loyalty of Chinese Americans during the campaign finance era in the 1990s, where I represented a bunch of Chinese Americans who had given money to the Democratic National Committee, and they all thought it was the evil Chinese government that was funneling in these donations to try to co-opt our political system. It sounds familiar to you, about the Russians and all that. So we've been fighting this battle for a while. When let me ask you this, Damon. How many people here know who Vincent Chin is? Very good. Say a good number, we just said. Better than 30. Yes, that's right. Well, Vincent Chin was one that resonated with a bunch of those young lawyers. He was murdered in 1983, I think it was, in Detroit by a bunch of white guys who thought he was Japanese and clubbed him to death during his bachelor party. And whereas we were beginning to organize our lawyer groups, we didn't have a whole lot of bandwidth. There weren't a lot of Asian American lawyers around the country, but we were starting to get more. So there was a group of us that got together in 1986 in Los Angeles in a conference room in West LA. And there were about 16 of us there from Northern California, Southern California, some people from New York and Boston and Hawaii. And we said, we need a national. And from that first meeting, we were in August of 1989, 3 years later, able to have our first convention, much like this, of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association in Holland, which now has 75,000 members. Okay, so that's where you can make a difference. You make a difference if you do things. You know, like my brother, Dale Benami, Japanese American lawyer from San Francisco, was the one who led the charge on 4 months here to get Fred's conviction overturned. Because of Vincent Chin's tragedy, we were able to get our shit together and form the Pava. And honestly, when Wet Hope Lee came along, the Woodlove, in 1999, what do you think most of the Asian groups did at that time? They ran it, they hid it. Why? Because they thought it was inspiring. Okay. Well, no, it's many things, but he's not a scholar. He's a geeky mathematician who asked me when I said I want to put on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace. You know, any people here remember who Mike Wallace was? Okay. He asked me, what's 60 Minutes and who's Mike Wallace? Okay. And but we broke the rules in representing Wenho because we didn't have the community support. And my co-counsel, Mark Holster, white guy, who I have cases against these days, but we were brothers then. We banded together, and I remember Mark tearing up at a small fundraiser that we had in San Jose about Wenho's case. And Mark Holster is a conservative Republican. Okay, so this culture, this crosses lines in terms of actual human decency, and this notion that we have to treat people right, give them that due process from which our Constitution is based. Now, we got the problem about loyalty, of course, and the emergence of China as a superpower and arrival to the United States. And that's something we battle every day. Okay. And comes across all kinds of different areas, whether it's simple fundamental rights like buying some property, okay, to the stuff that started in COVID. COVID, when people remember what Kung flu, Wuhan virus, you could have predicted what would happen for here just like that. Hate crimes against Asian Americans sprung up like wildfire. So once again, a bunch of us had to get on the phone. I had a funny joke with Jason. We're sitting at my cigar club. I get a phone call from my buddy Don New, who's chief legal officer for Target Corporation. Ivan Fong, who's chief legal officer for 3M. And a couple of partners, one from Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, Deb Yang, and some others. When you get on the phone, I'm saying, what do you guys want? Ron, we need to do something about it. So a few more phone calls later, we got together, made some calls, did some emails, and to show you the progress we had made since I was in law school in the 1970s, to the 2020s, some 40 some odd years later, we formed the Asian American the Alliance for Asian American Justice. And we were able to get over 100 law firms, big and small, but mostly big law firms like mine, and 50 general counsel for big companies to put together and say, we're going to do something about Asian hate. Okay, meaning not only advocate just to educate people not to do it, but to help the victims of that hate get pro bono legal service from the best lawyers in the country, whether they're Asian or non-Asian. Because we have the big law, including my big law firm, which is in the US based in Jamestown State. To do pro bono work for Haiti or for Asians, because it's not just Chinese. During COVID, I had one Korean woman run over by a white guy in his truck saying, "You killed my girlfriend with your COVID you brought over." She's Korean and hospitalized for 3 weeks. That's 4.5 years ago, and he's still in jail. I got a guy, a grandfather, Chinese American grandfather, going across the street in a stroller with his grandkids, 3 months old. Some guy comes up from behind the cold cocks and knocks him in the stroller over the baby. He's still in jail because of our ethics. Now, I run into some problems with my social justice liberal friends who say, oh, well, he's had mental health issues. Let's give him his meds and let him go. But we advocate for the victims. And even if I think maybe the guy would be not a perp if he wasn't on his meds, we advocate for the victims because the victims need advocates. Okay. And I got another one, and I'll stop here because I want Jason to talk about another topic we're here for, which is an Asian student at USC gets assaulted by a perp who's attacked with a sharp phone things in the net. LAPD calls up the DA, the liberal DA's office says, now cite him for a misdemeanor assault, let him go, like part. 3 days later, he kills a Korean businessman in the laundromat on video with a knife in the neck. Okay, that guy's still in jail too. His lawyer wants to get him out on mental health. And like social justice is, treat the mentally ill, of course. But how do you strike that balance? Okay, we try to provide the victims though legal counsel so they can exercise their rights to tell a sentencing judge what they think the appropriate sentence are. I don't tell the family what to do. We just help represent them as any lawyer should. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here real quick is a case that Jason and I are involved in Arcadia, California, where we represent the former mayor of that city who was charged with being an unregistered agent of a foreign country, in this case, the People's Republic of China. And after Jason talks a little bit about it, I don't want to talk so much about it. But the bottom line is, it circles back to why I'm here, why Gene is here. Look, Chinese people, Asian people aren't great at demonstrations and all that kind of stuff. All right. It's not our DNA, they say. But we got to fire up our younger people and our younger generation. I'm sort of like the grandfather. Jason's like my son. And younger lawyers now too. They're like grandkids. And we build and build and build, get more organized. We hit the rich Chinese guys or Asian guys and say, look, put your money with the politicians like Gene who can do some good. Show your power, show your influence. Okay. I used to work at a law firm that was representing Trump. But my partners and I had robust discussions about how we could strike the balance. Okay, I have a former partner who's general counsel of the FBI, a really good man. Now, he and I don't agree on 80% of the political issues here, but he and I can talk. And we can get something done positively through common ground. And that's why we need more lawyers. You know, make it a pinch here to get the kids to start thinking about it. You know, I represent some of the biggest companies in the world and all this stuff. And as what do I always say, Jason? If you ever see me again, you know you're in deep shit. Okay, you don't want to see me again because my rate is over $2,000 an hour. Okay, all right. So when we try to help someone like Eileen and get her narrative out, which we have to do carefully, there's a reason why we do it. And I want to ask Jason to talk a little bit about the perils and the reward in elected officials.
Thank you very much for your time. My name is Jason Leon, and as Brian indicated, I can remember I've been practicing for about 20 years or so. I've had the good fortune of following Brian's footsteps and working for him since basically the first day I got a lawyer. So we ended up working on a number of cases together. The latest case involving our former mayor client, the city of Arcade. And this is a good topic at a segue into the dangers of how US law works. Wow. Many of you have heard or read news articles about this particular case on unregistered foreign agent, and that's down bad, isn't it? You're a foreign agent, you haven't registered. The word spy is often bandied about in these cases. But if you were to look at the origins of the laws and really take a look into it, and this is where civics education really comes into play. While most of my friends are all STEM students, going to med school and engineering, and I was never good at math, I was never good at science. So my parents said, well, the only thing you that's left for you is law school. And my class was and I listened to my parents and went to law school, and as a consequence, I learned history and history often and stuff. The 18 USC 951 is a law that was born out of the First World War. And it was born out of the First World War, when the noting the First Amendment in this country was still being developed. This country has always had the one benefit of the ever-changing cycle of law. Okay. Second set of laws that are related to this area is called Foreign Agent Registration Act, born at pre-Second World War days. All of its targets would, but it is written in a way where it could apply to everyday activities. What you guys are doing now, taking this conversation, posting it online, having a social media account, voicing your opinions, all of these things potentially covered under the law. And the key question for 18 USC 951 is whether or not your activity was done at the request, the behest, or the control of a foreign agent, somebody who works for a foreign government, related to a foreign government. And in that case, if the law is truly written as broadly as it is and applied in that way, it could cover the innocent activity, still a technical violation of the law, to truly nefarious traditional espionage. And for that reason, we saw that early in the Trump administration, when Pam Bondi took office, she issued probably 80 something memos. And one of those memos that got buried on that same day was a memo that targeted this type of prosecution. In specific language of our Department of Justice, what it said is they will shift resources and target prosecution with traditional espionage activities, but moving towards civil and administrative resolution for other type of cases. The department may or may not follow that policy. What we can leave for another day, whether or not their decision to prosecute certain cases is motivated purely from an enforcement perspective or from some perspective. But what is key to understanding the law
is public perception, public support, and education. The government always has a right to prosecute every single law that remains on its books, as long as it's good law, right? There's nothing wrong with a prosecutor or a government agent coming in and saying, you violated the law. I bet you, if I will poll everyone in this room, for those of you who drive a car, y'all speed. I don't care where you're from. No one goes at 55 or 65 miles an hour, right? And if you say you do, well, let's see, right? Just because you speed though, doesn't mean and just because you haven't been caught speeding, doesn't mean you haven't violated the law, right? And other people doing the same thing doesn't mean that that violation doesn't exist. But when you're stopped for speeding, nobody comes to you and looks at you and say, you should go to jail for 10 years. No one comes to you and say, you are now disloyal. You, how dare you violate this law? When the government decides to enforce a law in a way where it covers everyday activity, then it is incumbent on us, the community, to actually understand what the law says. It may sound unfair, the law presumes you know what it says anyways, but for us to really look deeper and where we understand that the crime that is being charged is no better than, say, a speeding infraction because of some technicality, and where you don't have to prove some people with intent, then it is incumbent on us to create a counter narrative to what is being told to the public, to fight back against this notion of every violation of law question the loyalty of Asian Americans, because it does not. There can be a violation, there can be an acceptance of responsibility, and there can be a acknowledgement that a line was crossed. But simply because that line is crossed does not mean what the public thinks it means. It does not mean that an unregistered foreign agent is necessarily a spy, is necessarily conducting espionage. It means a whole host of different possibilities. And if you were to look at the government's FARA website, what you're going to see is American companies see registration all the time. American companies register to be foreign agents because there is nothing wrong with it. Because what they're doing is not inherently evil. And if that means somebody failed to register without knowing there's a registration requirement, then yes, it's a violation, but no, it is not spying, and no, it doesn't undermine the loyalty of our community. And what you heard Brian say earlier today, and I hope it resonates, because history often does repeat itself, and we see it time and time again. When they question the loyalty of Chinese Americans, it's Asian Americans who are affected. It does not matter if you're from mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Vietnam, wherever you may be from.
No, no.
It does not matter. They lash out just the same. During the COVID era, we saw hate being directed towards Chinese Americans, but Asian Americans suffering. Like going all the way back to the Vincent Chin era, what you see is hate being directed toward Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans suffer as a result. What you're going to see is that these prosecutions will take in different forms, different types of those from China to the non-disclosure of conflict of interest to the prosecution under 951 or FARA today. It
And
doesn't.
951 doesn't require you to know what the stealing was.
Correct. There's no intent requirement behind it for that. Just because it does that, it does not mean that there's nothing you can do in the community. Better education for our community has always been the bulwark against this type of selective prosecution. Educating the public about Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and the fact that we're here, we are Americans together, is the often the best approach in fighting back against this misinformation. I will tell you, if you talk to an FBI agent, Their view is if you're Chinese, it does not matter. You are Chinese, period. I wish that was true. If you're Asian, you're just Asian. I wish that was true. Our communities are divided because we don't have a unified voice. But they think we are a unified community. They think we're all the same battle. And that is simply not true. Right? We are a more complex community. We are divided in certain respects, but that doesn't mean we can't do something unified and educating the public and getting our messaging out so that the public can better understand how to deal with it, so that we don't only have, say, the Tom Shannon, the professor from MIT, being the minority example, those that seem to be behind them and accused of economic espionage. And this latest set of case with our former mayor of Arcadia is just shift in the tools are being used, but the counterbalance to that remains the same.
You know, many of you are either elected officials or soon to be elected officials. We're not trying to scare the shit out of you. Okay? We need you to step up even more, but it's hard. You gotta be careful. And I've been counseling, you know, people like Ted particularly, although I've known Ted and Betty since they were just out of law school. Okay, that's why I'm the grandfather. And, but, you know, public service is a hard thing. Doing all the stuff that me and Jason do, we do between our day jobs. But it's important. And as I always said, if you don't do it for yourself and your community, do it for who? The highs, for your kids. Because if you don't, it's. Right?